How's everybody doing?
Great.
Okay, so glad you're all here. I was invited to speak, and I have to tell you, I always dreamed of giving a speech, even like a commencement address. But now that I'm, here, I realize I have actually nothing to say. And if I did have something to say, like I think I have a couple of ideas, but I don't have an interesting way to say it. So, in fact, I was just at my son's graduation from college. He was at Brown University this past weekend. He just graduated, and they had a speaker the day before commencement, Dougie Diggs, who is a Tony Award-winning actor and rapper. And he pretty much said the same thing, that he had nothing to say to them. So, what I'm going to do instead is just tell you a story. Okay? No morals, no lessons, just a story. I love to tell stories. You can ask my children, you can ask my students. I love to tell stories. So here we go. First of all, this story takes place when I was 12 years old. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I don't know quite where to put the microphone. So I was 12 years old, and I had just switched from public school to a private prep school in New Haven, Connecticut, near where I grew up. And I went there, the school was from grades 7 through 12. I went there for 3 years. I was a scholarship kid. My parents didn't have a lot of money, but they wanted me to get as good an education as possible. They didn't love the public school system, so they sent me to this school. And maybe it would help you understand the story a little bit better if you knew what I looked like. Hang on one second. There we go. Now, that actually is not what I look like. That was I think that's my high school, my yearbook picture. So that tells you what my hair looked like, but this was, you gotta go back a few years to 7th grade, and I don't have a good picture of that time. I think I just burned them all. So let me just describe myself a little bit. I know it's hard to imagine looking at me now, but I was a really, really scrawny kid. I was like really, really thin. I was so thin, my friends, instead of calling me Silver, they called me Sliver. Right? Pretty obvious nickname, but that's what it was. So I was thin, I had goofy glasses, big hair. It was not a good time in my life. I hadn't grown into this, the stud that you see here when I was graduating high school. Wasn't quite there yet. Anyway, so that's who I was. And as a scholarship kid, I had a job. They gave you a job. My job was to deliver the attendance sheet. And the way it worked was first period or homeroom at the beginning of the day, while the teachers took attendance, they somehow sent it down to the secretary. The secretary typed it up, typed it up, and ran it off on a mimeograph machine. And I had to deliver them to all the classrooms in the school. And the school is a kind of a big campus, had 3 or 4 buildings. I would go to class instead of a study hall. That was my job. Pretty easy job. And it was pretty uneventful, except for one thing. A couple of classes like to make my life miserable. So one class in particular was very, very mean. It was a long classroom, sort of like a conference room. There were 2 doors with a table in the middle, and the kids sat around the table, and the teacher was on one end. And every time I would go in there, they would block one door or the other. I would never know which door to go into. When I went in, they would pull their chairs back. They would tease me and make fun of me. It was just miserable. I hated this particular class. Then there was another class. It wasn't so bad. They teased me, but it was a little more. It didn't make me feel so horrible. They were just a little good-natured about it. Didn't bother me too much. They were seniors, however. So you got to realize again, I'm 7th grade. There are students who are 12th graders there. Pretty big kids. So the teacher of the 12th grade class that wasn't so bad, but did tease me, her name was Mrs. Sandler. Now, Mrs. Sandler, she was one of these great English teachers who, taught us how to read and discuss literature. She taught me grammar. I still remember to this day that you should never say the reason is because. You should say the reason is that. And I've never forgotten that. She was also just a very nurturing teacher, and she was my English teacher as well as the senior teacher. So she was teaching a class. This class was a one-semester class, and it was in Shakespeare. So she was really embarrassed by the way they treated me because she thought they were horrible to me. She taught me, and she felt really, protective of me. So one day in January, she came to me in class and she said, my semester class is about to end on Friday. I'm going to give them a final exam. I know you put up with a lot, and I feel terrible for you, so I just want to tell you that if you want to do something to get back at them, go ahead. I promise you will not get in trouble. I won't say anything. Do whatever you want. Now, this was amazing because, first of all, they didn't bother me all that much. But, when you get a license like this from a teacher, right? So I thought about it and I said, okay, I'm going to do something. I went to my friends. We tried to bat around a few different ideas. We came up with one idea. They didn't think I would actually go through with it. But I decided I was going to see if I could. So Friday comes along. I go around my rounds, go to that miserable classroom, and they lock the back door. I go to the front. They close the front door. I go to the back. It was awful. Go down the hall to this other class. I walk in, I have my attendance sheet. I put it on the desk where the teacher is sitting, and of course, she's looking down, not looking up at me, letting me know it's okay, she's not going to look, I can do whatever I want. So I put the sheet of paper down, right here. I turn to leave. I stop at the doorknob. Keep in mind, they're all taking a Shakespeare final exam. I stop, I turn around, and I say the only Shakespeare that I knew at that time as a 12-year-old. I say, farewell, farewell, parting is such sweet sorrow. And then I blew them a kiss. And I was shaking, but I walked out the door, and a moment later, I could definitely hear the sound of chairs scraping against the ground. And I could hear and tell the entire class had stood up in the middle of their final exam and given me a standing ovation while I was out in the hall. So it was like reverberating down the hall, and I just felt fantastic. Now that's pretty much the end of the story. Just a couple little extra things. By the end of the day, every teacher in the building knew about it because Mrs. Sandler was so proud of me, she told everybody. At the end of the year, they give awards. I will tell you, in 8th grade, I won the math prize, not surprisingly. But in 7th grade, I got a student leadership award. And all my friends were like, why did you get a student leadership award? You're quiet. What did you do to lead us? But obviously, it was their attempt to recognize my bravery and my courage. And Mrs. Sandler just insisted I get recognized somehow for this momentous event. So, anyway, I should probably just stop right there, but I don't think I'm going to. Because there's a couple other things I want to say. First of all, this was like a peak experience for me. I never made the winning shot in a basketball game, but this was my peak experience, at least as a 12-year-old. And, I suppose I should say that getting married and having, watching my children be born, maybe even going to see my son graduate from college this past weekend. Those are probably more peak experiences, but in reality, no, it's not true. This was the peak experience in my life. Now, the second peak experience was related to this first peak experience, and that was last fall at a parents' weekend at my son's college. They had a Saturday night activity where it was like a moth story hour kind of thing. And I got up the courage to stand up in front of all these brilliant college students and my son and all his friends and all their parents, and I told that story, and I got to tell you, it went over well, fantastically well, and I got a rousing ovation from them, so that was like, I got another bang for my buck for that story. I got another peak experience just telling that story. And finally, I think I want to I know I promised no morals and no lessons, but you didn't really believe me, did you? So I think obviously this story is about a few different things. One is it's about bullying and triumphing over being bullied and standing up for yourself even when you're really scrawny. It also shows you that revenge can be sweet as long as it's, in moderation and done with humor. I think it's also a little bit about humor, the power, the uses of humor to diffuse a situation, to relax people, bring people together. And to this day, I use humor every day in my classroom. I didn't tell, Matt how to introduce me, but I think it made it into the introduction somehow. So clearly that's something, a part of who I am, even though most of my colleagues and adults would be surprised to hear that, because in social situations, I still tend to be the quiet, shy, reserved person. And finally, relative to today's themes, I think that the power of humor, as opposed to bullying, which creates barriers, humor can bring the barriers down and create connections between people. And so that's what I want to leave you with today. And I thank you for listening.